Erev Tov, Shalom Aleichem. Welcome. I'm so happy to see that because everybody came to Rabbi's class yesterday, now everybody knows that cleaning for Pesach only takes about 15-20 minutes. So you have the rest of the week free, which is really nice. So I'm so happy to be here with all of you. I want to read to you a poem. I don't know who wrote it, but I like it, so I'm going to read it to you anyway. It's called The Naked Truth. The lie said to the truth, "Let's take a bath together. The well water is very nice." The truth, still suspicious, tested the water and found out it was really nice. So they got naked and bathed. But suddenly, the lie leapt out of the water and fled, wearing the clothes of the truth. The truth, furious, climbed out of the well to get her clothes back. But the world, upon seeing the naked truth, looked away with anger and contempt. Poor truth returned to the well and disappeared forever, hiding her shame. Since then, the lie runs around the world, dressed as the truth, and society is very happy because the world has no desire to know the naked truth. If we don't live in a world that loves falsehood, I don't know what world we live in. In fact, this poem is based off an image by a famous painter. So famous he's made multiples. I don't know if I'll get his name right, but I have it written down. Jean-Léon Gérôme painted the famous The Naked Woman well. And if you Google, you'll see there are numerous variations of this picture where it's a woman coming out of a well, clearly naked, and she has a frightened look on her face, like, where's my clothes? Who took it? And the world's repulsion and contempt of it is very obvious. Because the naked truth is stark. It's bold. It stares us in the face. Lies are easy to swallow. I believe it was Rabbi Nachman of Breslov who said, if you find a city where there's no machloket, where everybody gets along, you should know that it's just a city of a bunch of liars. Because when everybody lies, it's really easy to get along with each other. You look amazing. In their head, you think, oh my gosh, you gained so much weight. Oh, wow. Rabbi shared this on Shabbat when we traveled this week. So a lot of the comments people gave us was, oh, how many kids do you have? And my answer was, not enough. And then they laugh because they think I'm joking. And they said, wow, you are so brave. And what we translated in our head was, you are so stupid. Because they're not going to say it to us, but that's what they mean. But we like lies. Yeah, I she means stupid, exactly. Right? Now I want to talk to you about one of the greatest lies that have been perpetuated and started way back in the 2nd century, still lives today. And then I want to talk about some deep, dark, difficult truths that we as a Jewish community have to deal with. And hopefully by being able to look at them, I believe it was Chief Justice. It wasn't Warren. It was the first Jewish Chief Justice. What was his name? Brandeis. Thank you, Louis Brandeis, who said the truth, like germs, when exposed to the sunlight, suddenly disappears. So let's look at some truths, some lies, and try to make some sense. If you're talking about Pesach, for those of you who were with us, a couple of Sundays ago, we baked. We baked beautiful matzot, 1,300 matzot. Shout out to my 2 brothers in New York who helped us get the flour. One of the most famous lies that we have throughout history is related to our matzot. Tell me what I'm talking about. Oh, okay. Very good. So Avinoam has come to enough shurim to know that we didn't just come out with dough baking on our back, a bunch of flat matzot laying there. But what am I talking about later on? Lies that have been told that have hurt the Jewish community tremendously, directly related to how and what we put into our matzot. Yes?
Blood. We use blood of children.
Oh, very good. Very good. Have you heard of blood libels? No. Okay, so for those of you unfamiliar, blood libels are lies. Okay, lies told about the Jewish community, in particular about how we bake the matzot. So here's how it works. This lie is recorded as early as in Josephus, where there was a Greek named Apion who said that the Jewish people, when they bake their bread, They always have to steal a non-Jew. This then takes on a new life, particularly a Christian, young boy preferably. They take him, they drain all his blood, and that's what they knead into the dough of the matzot. Why? Because they want to reenact, and I have to understand, Pesach forever used to come out the same time as Easter until their calendar kind of shifted a little bit. And they said, we want to reenact, right, history. So the Jews, and this story, as ludicrous as it sounds, as non-believable as it sounds, took on a life on its own. So I want to share with you a couple of different major blood libels and some of the ramifications that it had on the Jewish community. So we said the first one was recorded by Josephus, where now Josephus was Jewish, right? We know that. Josephus was Jewish, and he became what we would consider a Hellenistic Jew. So he wasn't necessarily part of the religious Jewish community, but he records the history very well. And he talks about this guy Apion who comes to the Greeks, to the Romans, though he's living in Egypt at that point, and he says, be careful, because Passover is coming, and you should know. No, his story is a little different. He's being fed. They ask him, why are you being fed? He said, don't you know they're stuffing me like they stuff the geese, so that eventually they're going to sacrifice me. Now this got the Jewish community in major trouble. Right. Fast forward. You then have. Let's talk about in England. You know, I always find it interesting when the English give us any kind of advice. I'm using the word interesting nicely. The nerve that they have to tell us anything. Do you know that they used to say, the slogan was that the sun never sets on the English Empire? Why? On the British Empire. Why? Because they controlled the whole world. So if anybody's going to give us speeches about colonism, right, colonialism, about misappropriating funds, about taking resources, and their whole excuses, but we were helping them. And the answer was no thanks, we didn't ask for your help, right? So it's always very interesting to me when the British are the ones who are pointing fingers at the Jewish people. Yeah. But you have already in, I believe it's in the 11th century in Norwich, a famous story where a young Christian goes missing and the community says, must be the Jews. Must be the Jews. And the wrath of the community, so more the locals, because the government itself, you have to understand the Middle Ages, we're not talking about very strong governments, right? It's feudalism. They're in the Dark Ages. The main central government really is the church, really the churches. The churches are the strongest powers at this point in history. And they come up with a story of the Jews kidnapped him and they must have taken his blood. And the locals really start hurting the Jewish communities. They go out into the streets. They start pillaging from the Jews. They start taking revenge from the Jewish communities. You ultimately have a series of expulsions where the Jewish community was, and we know this, the Jews were not very welcome in the British Empire for very long. They were expelled, I believe, in a 100-year period, more than twice, dozens of times. But you have over here, it then spreads. So in the 12th, 13th, 14th century, it starts spreading from what are we pressing? Oh, you see that? No worries. Yeah. Okay, you then move on. You have in 1171 in Blois, France. This is an interesting story. Again, a Christian disappears off the streets. Now, unfortunately, these things happen all the time for those, and I'm looking at you, Abraham. You know this all the time. You work in law enforcement. Every time I go to Walmart, my heart breaks. You look at a whole wall, there are always people missing, unfortunately. One of the hardest Uber drivers I once took was a guy. I said to him, do you do this full time? He said, no. I said, well, what do you do that after? He said, you don't want to know. I said, no, but I asked. And it turns out he works for a special government agency that deals with trafficking. And he shared with me some horrifying stories. Now, do these things exist? Sure. But from there to now the Jewish people kidnapping specifically Christians, turning them into bread is the most ludicrous of claims. But up until this incident, it was just claims and angry mobs. You have in the 12th century, so the late 1100s in France, another Christian goes disappearing, Passover time. And now the community and their wrath turn against the Jews so strongly that they take 31 Jews, and similar to in 1492 later, they put them on an auto da fe. They say, you did to ours what we're going to do to you. And they come and they burn the Jews. And this offsets a new trend in Europe, which is Passover time, grab the Jews, let's start murdering them. And they have to understand, this is The libels serve a few different purposes. The first is a very simple one. Tell me about Uman. What do you know about Uman? Good. So during the height of the war between Ukraine and Russia, where all the borders were closed and nobody's traveling, somehow for Rosh Hashanah, tens of thousands of Jews made it to Ukraine. Somehow they made it to Uman. Now, who helped them? The Ukrainian government. Why? It's very simple. Because if you have a saint in your backyard and people are willing to make pilgrimages, it will make your economy boom. And that's why you find that the locals were actually very happy, because posthumously they would take the Christian who was killed, turn him into a saint, and then that city would now become a pilgrimage. So much so that it wasn't until fairly recent history that some of the sainthood was repealed. So you have, for example, in Trent, Italy, one of the most famous blood libels happened where they, again, victimized the Jewish community. They turned the gravesite into a mass pilgrimage, and it's almost, I would say, almost 100 years later that they finally say, hold on, the facts may not have been as we thought they were. Maybe the child was not actually kidnapped. Now you move forward, so I'm moving really from west to east. Yes, it keeps catching on. It's like wildfire. You go to, let's jump to 1840. Yeah, jump with me. Are you familiar? Yeah. Oh, so in 1840, you have fascinating story. It's called the Damascus Affair. Why the Damascus? Where's Damascus? It's the capital of Syria. Now, at this point in history, who had leadership over the Syrians? The French. Why? Because the French, like the English, were colonizers. Unlike who? Unlike us. We were not. Yeah? Very good. So in the 1800s, we're talking about 1840s, you have the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire was known as the sick man of Europe. Why? It was an empire that just wouldn't die, but it was still sick, and it was sick, and it was sick, until eventually by World War II, you really saw the end of it completely. Yes, really World War I. World War I, you see the end of the Ottoman Empire, the Austro-Hungarian Empire. But in 1840, you have a Christian monk in Syria who gets kidnapped and killed. And the Christians in Syria they're fuming. Who should they blame? Of course, the Jews. Obviously, it's the Jews. The Jews took him. And they go to the city and they round up dozens of not just Jews, but the Jewish leadership. And they put them in prison. And you have to understand, the 1840s, it's already later in history. Meaning at this point, the larger organizations have denounced blood libels, have come out against it. The bigger church has come out saying, no, it's not true. We know that this is not accurate. But here starts a whole new fad in the Middle East that till today, and when I say till today, you can open up channels where there are Arabs speaking, and they will tell you, of course, the Jews kidnap our babies, our children, because they're using them to bake their blood. Now, the affair ends very horribly. Yes, we have a lot of the rabbis, unfortunately, get killed. With international intervention, I am not even as familiar. Chacham Yonatan is sharing that we're talking about not just Syrian Jews, but really the Chachamim of the Syrian community who were imprisoned, tortured. And it was only when there was international pressure on the French and on the Ottoman Turks that eventually they were released from prison, but they were still indicted, meaning, you're wrong, we know you did it, but we're going to let you go. And again, this fad takes on like wildfire in the Muslim world, specifically in the Middle East. You then move forward. Of course. He once read about it.
I gave a shiur about it once in the UK, in the Sephardic Shiviti Bet UK. We gave a shiur about it. One thing to know, very interesting. If it wasn't for Sir Moses Montefiore,
very good,
who got involved, and he pulled all of his strings, he really was able to fix a lot of things here. Contrast that, the Jews in the United States did not want to get involved. They were too afraid to pressure. It's 1840. Too afraid to pressure the American government to get involved. Just like in the Holocaust.
Very good. But it's the first time in 1840, when the Damascus affair happens, you do find the first time the small Jewish community, particularly the religious community of the United States, does send a delegation to the State Department. But they're similar to World War II, where they sent a delegation and President Roosevelt doesn't even come out. He sends his secretary of press. It was Roosevelt or Truman. I don't remember which one. I think Roosevelt. It was Roosevelt. And he says, I don't have time to meet with you. But you're right. In general, you find, unfortunately, the Jews of the United States I can't tell you it's apathy. I would like to call it fear of we don't want to get our hands dirty. Whatever happens, they took President Washington's words too seriously. President Washington, in his farewell address, was speaking to his fellow Americans, and one of the things he warns them is never to get into any tangling alliances. He says, America's for the Americas. What happens across the ocean, don't get involved. The American Jews sometimes, unfortunately, take their American citizenship too seriously, and they don't realize that before we are Americans, we're Jews. And whatever happens on one side of the pond ultimately will affect the Jews on the other side. Nobody cared that you had German citizenship. It didn't really matter. So thank you for adding that. Yes. That's not an interruption.
Today we got a notification. Today we got a notification. There's a Jewish organization demanding from Trader Joe's not to carry Israeli matzot because they're blood matzot.
Oh, yeah.
The Palestinian people. And that instead they should only buy American matzot. And they want to tell Trader Joe's to switch their Israeli matzot.
I'm sure there are Jews spearheading it. Of course.
How could we eat?
Of course.
Could we eat blood matzot? Think to myself, are you not even familiar? Today I got it. Today.
Really? So talk about blood libels. I guess the most current one being today. I want to share with you another one in 1911. Now you have to understand, 1911 is at the cusp of World War I because World War I starts in 1912 and goes till 1914. Yes? 1914 to 1918, and then 1939 continues to 1943. Yes? So we're to 40, right. Well, yes, until the Americans got involved in 43. You're right. 45, 46, 2025. If you grew up in the community I grew, you know that Hitler, Yimach Shemo, is still alive and well. His korbanot, we call them, his sacrifices still live. But what am I telling you? So in 1911, 1912, you have what's known as the famous Mendel-Beilis or Beilis affair, which happens in modern-day Ukraine, but it was under the Russian Empire, where, again, a Jew is taken into custody and held for 2 years because there was a Christian who was killed. And most of the debate, you can actually read it. It's a fascinating legal court that goes on where their debate is not so much about whether he killed the Christian. For 2 years, they're debating whether Jews are allowed to eat blood, whether Jews are allowed to take Christians and kill them, whether Jews consider the non-Jew to be equal. And unfortunately, one of the most famous psukim that they use against us is Atem kroyim adam, that you are called man. And they say, well, if you're called man, that's referring to Jews, then what are non-Jews? And the court case is wild. Now you have to understand, Russia today is not somewhere you want to be even in the picnic area, let alone in 1911 in one of their jails and prisons. I highly recommend. There's a book. It's called The Court Case of Mendel-Beilis. Fascinating read. Eventually he gets out, but the accusation is not dropped. He simply gets out mostly because of international pressure. You have to understand at this point, there are newspapers, there are cameras, there are people who are talking, and with tremendous international pressure, he gets out. Fast forward, in the 1930s, we have a new magazine called The Stormer, published by the Nazis, right? By somebody, Streicher, I believe Julius Streicher. And on his front page is the famous picture of the Jews. And you see, obviously, a long hook nose and very obvious kippot and peyot. And they're holding a Christian draining his blood. Now, in there, much of the content is the Jewish people, you don't understand. They don't just control the world, but they're here to suck the blood out of everything, both metaphorically on an economic level and also practically. Now, even this is 1936. We're not talking about the 2nd century, 1100 Crusaders. Fast forward, after the war. So you have pressure from different communities to try to dispel it, to try to disprove it, to try to let this lie die, but it somehow it takes on a life on its own. You have even in 2020, there was an Italian caricaturist who made a picture again of the Jews draining the blood of a Christian. And it's absurd, but more than absurd, it's very, very hurtful. It's hurtful because it's an accusation that is so outlandish that it tells you how abominable they think we are. And that really hurts. That really hurts. It doesn't just hurt on a practical level of the Jews were hurt and persecuted, and this was opportunities to make sure that the Jewish communities were massacred. In fact, I wanted to share with you that in France, on the 20th of Sivan, remember I told you in Blois, that's when they enact a fast day, the 20th of Sivan, because of the massacre of the blood libel. Later on, they add to it in 1648 and 1649, the cities in France, Germany, were attacked again by Khmelnytsky, and the 20th of Sivan becomes a very significant day. Unfortunately, I say significant in a very unpositive way. Now, I can't profess to tell you why these blood libels happen, how we make them disappear. But I want to share with you something. And I'm going to preface it with saying this is not something, God forbid, I would ever say. Okay? I'm not from the people who say, Chas v'shalom, you hear this. Why did the war start October 7th? Oh, because, and then people give you a stupid reason. Why did the Holocaust happen? Unless you're God, I don't think you have the right to tell people why things of this monstrosity take place. But I want to share with you something fascinating. So I called my parents because I needed the source, and I couldn't find the source. Now, my parents were arguing because my father said there's no way that this is a Hasidic source, and I'll share with you in a minute why. He said the source, it couldn't be said by somebody like a Hasid. It must be somebody Lithuanian. Why? Because only the Lithuanians could come up with such bad ideas, such sad ideas. It's definitely not Hasidim. My mother said, no, it's not true, because if you understand the spin of what the person said, then you'll understand it's the most beautiful, enlightening thing. Turns out my mother's right. My mother's always right. That's the truth. My mother's always right, but she's very smart. So she lets my father think he's right too. So the truth is, my parents are really both right, because there are two different sources that give the same answer, but for different reasons. My grandparents came from a little village in what's today the Ukraine, but it's a 9-hour commute from Kiev, north, I believe, west, a little town called Berdichev. Now, I know today when we tell stories specifically in the Hasidim, it always sounds like this was Madison Square Garden, but it wasn't. If you ever go to the Baal Shem Tov HaKadosh's, his gravesite and his synagogue, it was about the size of ours, which always tells me that great things could happen in very small spaces. It has nothing to do with how big a place is, as much as how passionate and willing and able and determined people are to make a difference. So in Berdichev, there was a famous Rebbe, he was the Rav. The Rav, Rebbe Levi Yitzchak of Berdichev, famously known as the Sanigoron Shel Yisrael. He was known as the Jewish advocate. For example, if he would go out onto the street and he saw somebody during tefillah on their iPhone, right? So normally you would say, oh, what are you praying? What is this? He would turn to God and say, your children are so amazing. Even when they're so busy working on their emails, they still remember to pray. Such amazing kids you have. Right? That's the way he would speak. Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Berdichev came into his town, and he went to the matzah bakeries, to the factories where they were baking matzot for Chag. And he saw, who do they employ in these bakeries? It's not like today where the qualifications are 30 different qualifications. Everyone has to go to the mikveh before. They have to have a beard. They have to have peyot. Who did they employ? Normally, this job was the widows of town. The widows, they would start, and I have to understand, in some places you start as early as Chanukah to make the matzot. I can imagine in those days not that early, but this was something that they were employable at, which makes a lot of sense. The women in the house know how to make the bread. So he came into the matzah bakeries, and he called a town meeting. And he said, and again, I'm quoting him, not me. He said, the blood libels that the non-Jewish community say about us, they couldn't be greater lies. Of course we don't take the blood of Christians and bake into our matzot. He said, but you know whose blood we do take? He said, we take the Jewish people's blood. How could it be that you work these women who have nobody to stand up for them in such horrible conditions? How could it be that these women are standing on their feet sometimes 16, 17, 18, 20 hours, making wages that are below minimum, only to be thrown out on the streets when you could replace them with somebody better? So how could it be? How could it be that you're taking Jewish blood and you're putting it into the matzot? A similar sentiment was echoed, and this is where my father said, must be Litvish. The rabbi said, of course we don't use Christian blood. He said, but you know why these blood libels come Pesach time? I'm going to say it in Yiddish. He said, because the Jewish community zapt Yiddische Blut. The Jewish community sucks out the blood of the Jewish people. Why? What happens Pesach time? A whole year you go to the grocery. Maybe it's affordable, maybe it's not. A whole year you want to buy your kids clothing, shoes, suit. It's affordable, maybe it's not. Comes Passover, every shop owner knows, for sure for Pesach you're going to spend money. So what do they do to the prices? They hike it up. Right, so the bottle of oil that yesterday cost you $10, today is going to cost you $40. The shoes that if you would have bought a pre-sale Purim time would have cost you $50, today they're going to cost you $150. He said, how could it be that it comes Erev Pesach and the Jewish community, we suck the life out of ourselves, all in the name of doing the right thing. All in the name of we want to be so holy, we want to be so good, but who are we hurting? And I think there's truth. And I think when there's truth, we have to be able to examine what happens so that we could fix it. So I'm going to ask you with sensitivity. Let's look a little bit of what are some of the issues particular to Pesach, particular to the Jewish community, and maybe this year we can fix them. Because I'm positive that the blood libels out there, they're going to come, they're going to go. That's not something that we can necessarily control. But what happens internally in the Jewish community, that's something that not only we could control, it's something we have to stop. So I want to look at it with you for a bit. If you take your Haggadah, let's open up to the beginning. So if you go to last year's playlist, we talked about the origins of a nation, how the Jewish people were created, what our humble beginnings are. I recommend you listen to it. Because a people who know where they came from will also be a nation that knows where to go. And humility will be the first key. Right? If you look a little bit further into Haggadah, it says, Mitchila ovdei avodah zara. In the beginning, our grandparents were all idol worshippers. We all have a history. It's good for us to stay humble. But if you look at page 20, let's go to page 28. It's the beginning of Magid. Okay. So this is the main crux of the Seder, where we start saying the story of Yetziat Mitzrayim. But before we start, we have a very interesting passage over here. What am I talking about? Let's read. Want to read, Dalia? Behold. Let's read English. Wait. And see the bread of woe which our ancestors ate while they were enslaved in Egypt. Continue. Let all who hunger come partake. Let all who are in need come and join us for the Pesach Seder. For the present, we are here, but next year we will be in Eretz Yisrael. So for this year, we're still here in Galut, we're still in servitude, but next year, Bezrat Hashem, we're going to be free men. Now comes Pesach, it's all about the making of a nation. And I think a lot of us, we talk about Am Yisrael, the Jewish people, the Jewish nation, my people. And yet the truth is, it's my people with a little asterisk. Because everybody has their nation, minus the people that they feel don't fit in. And everybody's list looks different. So sometimes on a larger scale, the Jewish community has people that they don't like. And then sometimes on an individual scale, there are people that you don't like. So I love all the Jews in the world, except for my neighbor next door, because they drive me nuts, right? I love all the Jewish people, except for my in-laws. No, I like my in-laws a lot. In fact, they're right here on the screen. And
we like our neighbors next door.
And we like our neighbors next. We love our neighbors next door. But everybody has their, right? We're a nation, but there's always going to be the exclusionary group. Sometimes we call them the Mitzrayim, right? Who are the Mitzrayim? Who are the lepers of society? What's a leper? Yeah. Oh, okay, very nice. Yeah. Okay, so I'm talking about leprosy as a skin condition that was something that would cause the person to have to leave the camp of the nation. I love you, Avinam. Right? But they would have to stay on the periphery. They would have to stay on the periphery. Avinam, I'm so happy. Avinam thought I said leopard. I'm meanwhile saying leprosy, but it's a good chad gadya over here. Yeah. So you always have in the Jewish community, and I'm specifically speaking about the Jewish community. Are there similarities to other communities? Sure, but I'm not here to critique them today. I'm talking about us. There are always the people who are in the inner circle, and then there are those who, for whatever reason, live on the outside rim. And the interface is sometimes impenetrable. Impenetrable. What do I mean? I spoke to somebody today, and she told me that she has a child who likes to wear funky clothing. What do I mean by funky clothing? Tie-dyed shirts with big tweedies over here. Now, you might be looking at me thinking, what's wrong with that? The answer is nothing, but it depends on where you're from. And she said, I couldn't get my child into one high school. I said, why? She said, because they don't have a high school in my community that is willing to accept somebody like my child. I said, like your child, does she do drugs? No. Does she drink alcohol? No. And does she commit petty crimes? No. So what's her crime? Her crime is she doesn't want to conform. And because she wants to be an individual, so she now gets put into the Michutz Lamachane camp. She gets put into the periphery. Because we are a nation, except we don't have room for Tweety sweatshirts. I spoke to somebody else. And they said that they forever grow up being the other. Why? Because their parents, you see, two people, sometimes they get together. And they're a good match, so they stay together. And sometimes, unfortunately, there are two people who get together and they're not a good match. And that's what divorce is made for. Is it the child's fault that parents couldn't get along? No. I'm not blaming the parents either. Simply, the child is certainly not to blame for a divorce. And yet in certain communities, that is considered a blemish. A blemish enough that the child is now an outsider. The child no longer fits in. The child grows into a young adult. You want another example? I'll give you another example. You can tell I spent some time on the East Coast last week because I have a lot of examples now. It's also why I like to stay on the West Coast more. Somebody asked me about our community. I said, you know what's unique about our community? We don't only talk about Achdut and Achdut. We don't just talk about unity and unity. In fact, we don't even talk about unity because we don't have to. Because my community is actually a family. Everybody in this room is my family. I would eat by everybody. My children would eat by everybody. You keep talking about it, but you don't do anything about it. So I want to talk to you about the periphery. You start off the Haggadah with a very interesting statement, which is, at this point, everybody's home. Everybody's in their own house already. And now you're going to invite the guests. It's almost like us. Every Thursday night, Rabbi and I look at each other and say, oh, we can't believe it's Thursday. Okay, let's send out invitations to invite people for Shabbat. The problem is normal people by Thursday have already made plans. In fact, normal people by Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, they've already made plans. Here, it's already Pesach. Everybody's sitting by the Seder. What are we inviting them to? I want to read to you something interesting from Chacham Ovadia Yosef's Haggadah. He says, if you notice who we're inviting over here, it says, Kol Dichmin, anybody who wants to come eat. There's no differentiation. The Jews, the non-Jews, whoever's hungry, just come eat. And Chacham Ovadia Yosef brings, he says, Yesh levaer hakesher b'psika zo al pi hamevor b'Yalkut Echa. He brings from the Yalkut Echa, and it says, Galta Yehuda me'oni, that the Jewish people were exiled me'oni. What does me'oni mean? So, two things. Either it can mean that they didn't eat the lechem oni, meaning on Pesach they ate chametz. They desecrated Pesach, and therefore the destruction was brought. The second reason, what is an ani? Who's an ani? Oh, the poor people. The poor people. The Yalkut Echa tells us, you know why the destruction was brought upon the Jewish people? Not because they didn't keep Shabbat and kosher and tefillin. Hashem knows he's big. You know why we were destroyed? Because of the poor person. Because of the widow. because of the orphan, because of the convert, because of the person who was out on the periphery crying to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, my own people have thrown me out. Ki avivi mi azavuni v'Adonai yasveni. David HaMelech says, my parents. If your parents are the people who threw you out, then who should love you? I'm telling you, New York is wonderful for me. We were just somewhere in New York, and Rabbi and I were talking to people, and one of the parents looked at us, and this is an older individual, and they said to us, how long am I supposed to love my child for?
True story. I was there.
And we looked at them and said, forever? They said, what do you mean forever? We've been so good to them, and all they do is make us problems. And I said, I know, it's true, you're right. Maybe children are challenging. And Rabbi was much better. He said, what do you mean? You never make problems for HaKadosh Baruch Hu? You don't make problems for God? So the person said, yeah, I do. He said, right, and is God kind to you? He said, yeah. He said, good, so you have to be like God. And this person said, yeah, but I'm not like God. I don't have the power and strength that he does. So Rabbi said, that's good. That's why he only gave you one child like this and not the rest of them that are so challenging. How long do I need to love them? Do you understand the question? The destruction of the Jewish people started when we forgot about the most vulnerable in our society. You see, the rich person who everybody anyway says hello to and brings them a chair and tells them how wonderful they are, even if they're stupid, and he doesn't need you. Right? The popular kid who has 30 people calling them all the time to check in how they're doing, it doesn't really matter if you check in too. The wedding where there are 6,000 guests, 6,001 guests won't make the difference. I promise you. The birthday party that everybody in the class wanted to be at, they don't need you there. It's the vulnerable of society. The old, the poor, the sick, the weak. Those are the ones who, if we neglect, who's going to care for them? You want to know why the Jewish people got destroyed? Because we neglected the aniyim, the poor people. It's amazing. I always say, you take somebody, I worked with somebody once, she said, my son, I asked her about her son. So she said, my son, because they have money at work, they tell me that he's eclectic. She said, but I know him, he's just crazy. And I thought that was a very important sentence. Because a lot of times if you add just a few dollar signs in front of somebody's name, suddenly they become so interesting and eclectic and different. And if you take away the dollar sign, suddenly they're weird, they're crazy, they're nuts, they're filling all the derogatory adjectives we have. What changed? Nothing. Just what you think about their bank account. Unfortunately, the Jewish community, we have a problem. Particularly, and I'm going to say, the more religious you become, and the more poverty-struck the community is at large, the more the wealthy people have a very tight grip on society. And this is not, God forbid, to lump all wealthy people. There are good people who HaKadosh Baruch Hu has good bankers. They give money, they do tzedakah. But just because you have a few dollar signs in front of your name doesn't give you the ability to be the tyrant of town. And the Jewish community has to wake up and say, Kol dichvin, who wants to come to my meal? The person outside? The one sitting on the bench that nobody wants? Today I went to do a couple of returns. It's very good. My husband and I, we have a good partnership. He keeps ordering from Amazon and I keep doing the returns. So this is our partnership. Same thing with you, Jordana, just the reverse, right? Sometimes, yeah. So this has always been he orders, I return, but I'm not embarrassed to do returns. So I was doing the returns and I came out and unfortunately there was somebody sitting on the bench and it was quite obvious that the only thing the person owned was the bench, right? And I'm thinking to myself, this was once somebody's child. This was once a baby who, when that first cry came, somebody somewhere for a brief moment celebrated, said Mazal Tov, and it hurt me. It hurt me because most of the time, you see the person on the bench and you do two things. Either you patronize them, wow, how are you? Just because the person's homeless doesn't also mean that they're slow. You can talk to them like normal human beings. Or what's more common is we just turn a blind eye. Because you ever do this with little kids? You can't see me, because if I can't see you, you can't see me. Now that works when you're 2. It doesn't work when, as a society, we still act like 2-year-olds. I don't see which homeless people? Oh, the veterans? I don't even see them. Oh, which people are suffering? Oh, there are old people who are lonely. Where do the old people live? I never see old people. Oh, sick? I didn't know there were sick people in hospitals. Are you kidding me? They should make signs about these people, right? We play the same silly peekaboo game in a much more sophisticated fashion. And that brings me to the second part that Chacham Ovadia Yosef, I have to read it to you inside because I appreciated his sense of humor. And for the Hebrew speakers, you will as well.
Ovadia, aside from how serious he was, and sometimes said things that were, he was hilarious. He was a very funny person. Very funny.
You know,
unless you were on the receiving end, then not so fun.
I think you see a lot of this in Chacham Ovadia's short video clips that they make of him. I recommend you watch them. Not the long. The long shiurim are real serious classes, but the ones that he's given to the general public, his theatrics, his jokes, his ability to explain, and I think you get this a lot because once somebody told Rabbi he doesn't like to come to his classes because he's way too theatrical. And then, I don't know if it was a compliment, they said, I like to come to the Rabbanit because she has no theatrics at all. And then I said, oh no, was that Kiefer? She's boring as hell? I don't know, forgive me. But to be an engaging speaker is very important. Yeah, so I want to read to you. Chacham Ovadia says, if you look at, you continue on. So after Halachmanya, we have next, I'm going to be on page 30. We have the Manishtana, right? Manishtana halayla zeh mikol haleilot. What is tonight different from all the other nights? And we have 4 questions. If you look at page 32, the next paragraph we have starts with, Elchanan, what do you have there on page 32? The big print. Yeah. Very good. You have Avadim Hayinu. So the order is we say Hal or Kehalachmanya. This is the bread of poverty. Whoever wants to come eat. Then we ask the questions Manishtana, and then we say Avadim Hayinu. So I want to read to you Chacham Ovadia Yosef's answer as to why is it in this order. He says Avadim Hayinu leparo b'Mitzrayim. Yesh mefarishim b'derech halatza. So there are those who, in like a whimsical way, say, what's hakesher shel sheloshet piskaot elu? What's the connection between these 3 paragraphs? Halachmanya, Manishtana, and Avadim Hayinu. Halachmanya, Manishtana, Avadim Hayinu. Ki haben, at the seder, everything we do is so that the children know to ask questions so that we can then share with them. Ki haben mitpale al aviv sheomer. The child looks at the father and in wonder, when the father's saying, Halachmanya, kol dichvin yetev yechol, shenasa befeta pitom nidiv lev. The son is looking at the father and he says, wow, my father suddenly overnight became this noble character who's inviting the poor, who's welcoming everybody into our house. And he says, he said, a whole year I've never heard my father once utter these words. My father, a whole year, he sees the poor people, he makes sure, cross to the other street. I knew people. I grew up in a very special community. And I say this l'shevach, to praise. I had neighbors who were very wealthy. What do I mean wealthy? Very wealthy. And every night, they would open their doors to people who came collecting, and they would give out checks. Not dollar bills, not 5s, not 100s, in the thousands. In fact, I had some neighbors who would have particular nights. So it's Tuesday night by this person, Wednesday night, and you would come into their house. They had a foyer set up. So it wasn't the poor person coming and making them feel like a pauper. You come and they had a whole buffet, hot food, drinks, and then one at a time they would bring them into their office, tell me a story, I'll write a check. That's where I grew up. But then you also had the neighbors. I remember why, because when I was very little, very bad idea. They would make us sell raffles for my school. So from 4th grade, you go around, and this is how it goes. You say, hi, do you want to buy a raffle from Beis Bracha for 2 tickets to Eretz Yisrael, to Israel? 1 for $2, 2 for $5, 5 for $10, and $10, $20 for a whole booklet. I would go from door to door to door to door. And the incentives were like broken cameras or etch-a-sketches, right? Prizes. And I remember the feeling when I'm not collecting for myself. right? So there are some people who would open the door and they were so kind. They would either buy a raffle or they wouldn't, but they were kind. I remember one of my neighbors, I knocked on the door and I wasn't sure I should knock on it because it was dark. And when she opened the door, she took 3 nickels and threw them at my head. And she said, here, take this to your stupid school. I remember thinking to myself, wow, that was so embarrassing. I'm not even collecting for myself. But the shame, right? I had another incident. I went into the apartment buildings where we lived, were all Jewish people, except for there were a few old neighbors that were Russian people, not necessarily Jewish. Dalia is our tech today. So, so what happened? I remember coming to one apartment building. I grew up in a community that nobody has dogs. Nobody. And I knocked on the door, and after that I heard barking from the other side. So I knew for sure this couldn't, if at least they were not a religious family. For sure not, maybe they were not Jewish. And the fear I had that they were going to open the door and maybe, who knows what's going to happen? And the neighbor from next door opened the door. She said, come into my house. And I knew she was Jewish. Her house smelled like delicious fried onions. She was making food. She obviously looked, she was, and she said, aren't you Goldberger? I said, I am. She said, your mother lets you come out collecting? I said, no. And she called my mother, and she had my mother come pick me up, and I was very embarrassed. She said, don't you ever go collecting in apartment buildings again. Why am I telling you this? Because the child looks and says, Dad, you're from the people a whole year when the poor people came, you shut the shutters, you closed the people, and you said, shh, tell them I'm not home. That was you. Every time there was an organization that called on the phone and said, I'm sleeping, I'm not available. Can you come join this chesed committee? No, I'm sorry. You know those people? In theory, they want to be on committees. In theory. They always have good ideas for you. But when it comes to, okay, so do you also you want to volunteer? Do you also, no, me, I'm sick. My child's sick. I'm going on a cruise next week, yesterday, tomorrow. Whenever you need me, I'm not available. Right? He says, today, my something's wrong with him. So what does his dad tell him? And therefore the child turns to his father and he says, what is different tonight than all the other nights? Abba, what's wrong with you? Tonight you're being so kind. And what does the father say? So the father answers him, don't worry. We were slaves to Paro. And I learned some midot from him. What did I learn? Ma Paro omer ve'eno oseh. Just like Paro promised the Jewish people gold and silver and I'm going to be on your team and I'm going to let you go. And what happened in the end? Nothing. He worked us like slaves for 210 years. He says, just like Paro omer ve'eno oseh, gozer ve'eno mekayim, af ani omer bapeh ve'eni oseh. It's the same thing. Don't worry. Don't be so scared. I'm inviting the poor people. I don't mean it. It's why I waited till everybody goes home from the synagogue to say this tefillah. It's why I waited till we get home and they said, and I look at, oh, sorry, there are no guests. Oh, such a pity. Yeah. He says, don't worry, I learned from Paro. ומכאן מוסר השכל על אלו שאינם ממלאים חובתם באמת וצדק. He said, from here you really have to take it to heart. Those people who promise to do good to the Jewish community, ונמנעים מלתת קמחא דפסחא, and we forget to give Erev Pesach, you have a little pocket change. So look for the people who, maybe they don't. Reminds me of a lawyer joke. They say there was once somebody campaigning and they got a roster of a bunch of names. I see Mr. Cohen. Mr. Cohen looks Jewish. Let me give him a call. So they pick up the phone and say, Mr. Cohen, we got your information from the IRS and we see that you're a lawyer and we're hoping that you'll be able to make a donation. And Mr. Cohen on the other side said, oh, I'm so happy you got my information from the IRS. Did they also tell you that I have a sister who's sick in Florida? I said, no, we're so sorry to hear that. He said, yeah. Did you also get the information that his mother has been homebound and needs caretakers 24/7? He said, no, we're so sorry, Mr. Cohen, dear. He said, yeah, also, did they tell you about my estranged brother who's in debt $10 million? No, we're so sorry. Mr. Cohen says, did they also share with you that those are my 3 relatives and I don't give them a penny? So what makes you think that I'm going to give to your charity organization? Now, we don't want to be that Mr. Cohen. When people look at us and say, so you already have everything you need for Pesach. And I'm not just talking about finances. In fact, I read a good quote. It said, sometimes people are so poor, the only thing they have is money. Sometimes people are so poor, the only thing they have is money. What about a smile? You have an extra smile? What's it going to cost you to give it to somebody? We were now in the airport. I have to tell you, there's a special, I think, TSA has different hiring requirements. One of them, my feeling is, it has to be people who don't know how to smile. Because if you know how to smile, you're not qualified for the job. Now, I always wonder, what's it going to hurt you to smile at me? It's 5 o'clock in the morning. We're all cranky. We're all in the same boat. Do you think I want to be taking my shoes off again? Do you think I want to fold 6 different laptops and take them out of the bags? I don't want to do that. You can crack a smile. What's it going to cost you? Ask somebody, hi, how are you? Try this. Ask people how they are and actually stick around for the answer. You'll be surprised. People aren't always okay. But most of the time, people know you're not even asking to ask. Because if they said, I'm doing miserable, you would say, oh, that's nice. Have a good day. Right? Why? Because I didn't really ask. I didn't mean. Please, don't overshare. Right? Don't overshare. I didn't actually want to know how your day was. I really don't want to know how you're feeling. I don't want to know about your life. But that's our obligation. We committed to it. As human beings, we committed to being part of the human race, to caring about each other. And if we don't fulfill it, so then we're the people who, avadim hayinu leparo mitzrayim. We learned from who? We learned from Paro. Yeah, we learned from the side of the Egyptians. If I can, I have a little bit of time. Yeah. I'm going to skip this, but I want you to go. Type in the 613 mitzvot. Go through the list of 613 mitzvot, and you can find this easily if you Google it. And look at how many times HaKadosh Baruch Hu commands us to be nice to other people in all different shapes and forms. Just take a highlighter and check off, underline, highlight. That's what highlighters do. Highlight. Which mitzvot are mitzvot ben adam lachavero, between man and another human being? You are going to be surprised. Because we know that in Yom HaKippurim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, between me and you, everything could be fine. Don't worry so much. You didn't keep Shabbat perfectly? That's why there are 52 of them. Your kashrut was a bit off? Good, you'll have another opportunity because you eat all day anyway. So your next meal will be better. Right? Those things we could fix. What can't we fix? Ben adam lechavero, ad sheyitratzeh et chavero, until you go and you ask your friend, please, I'm sorry I wronged you. And why am I telling you about Yom HaKippurim? Because now it's Pesach. So you get to be from the people who by Yom HaKippurim we don't have to ask forgiveness because we already took preventative measures. Go, I'm asking you, take the 613 mitzvot, look at them. What are my obligations to other people? Because you may not be sure. Right? Somebody recently asked me about money. They had a certain amount of money that they wanted to give. And they wanted to know who should I give to, right? Thank God today there are so many big organizations, so many individuals. That's a great question. Guess what? There are halachot about it. So it's not a guessing game, right? How am I supposed to be nice to my parents? What does it mean to be respectful? What does it mean, kabed? What does it mean, yira? That's a great question. Guess what? There are halachot about it. Right? That's the nice part. The 613 mitzvot didn't just come as 613 recommendations. It also came with very explicit ways how you're going to fulfill the obligation. Because my idea of nice and your idea of nice could be two very different nice. Right? There's a kids tape we have. My kids will probably know this reference, where there's this boy who decides he's going to be nice to everybody on the world. And he sees an old man standing over there with a heavy suitcase. So he runs over to him and he grabs the suitcase and the guy is trying to tell him something. And the boy says, no, don't worry. And the guy is trying to, I'll take it for you. I could carry the suitcase. I could carry you. And he brings it to the other side of the street. And as he carries it, the old man is running after him. And the boy says, no, don't worry. You don't have to tip me. It's okay. Everything's good. And the old man says, you fool. I'm waiting for the bus. The bus is now on the other side. I missed the bus because of you. You're busy taking my belongings to the other. Stop a minute and ask me what I want. Because I didn't need you to take my suitcase from one point to the other. In fact, I didn't need anything from you if you would have only asked. And I think a lot of times when it comes to dealing with other people, we're always trying to play this guessing game. What does the other person want? Right? Couples, you'll find this a lot. None of you are prophets. So you're sitting here waiting for the other person to ask you something, but they're not a prophet, so they don't know. And what happens 5 minutes in, 10 minutes in, then you start brooding. Then you start getting angry. Then 30 minutes later, it's a full-blown fight when it could have just been a conversation. Because if you would have just said, hey, could you please bring me the cup of water I asked you for 4 days ago, then things could have been solved. But you didn't say that. So 4 days later, you're really angry now. This doesn't only happen in couples. This happens in every relationship. The Torah gives us the guide of, so I want to be kind to humanity. I want to take care of the periphery. What does it look like? And I want to read to you 2 very thought-provoking articles and end with that. So this is something that was written, Dalia, you're popular today, en ma lasot. This is from a newspaper clipping from 1913. So I'm going to remind our, I'm not going to say our friends because they're not our friends, our oppressors who are trying to reclaim land that never was theirs. 1948, as significant as a date as it was not when the Jewish state started. The Jews have forever been in the land of Israel. In fact, my great, I'm talking about in the late 1700s, passed away in Tzfat, my great-great-grandfather, and he's buried up, where the Ari HaKadosh is, and Reb Levi Bal Yisurim, and the Arizal, because they didn't bring him from Hungary. He was just there. Guess why he was just there? Because we always had Jewish communities in Israel, because the Jews always lived in Israel. It's true, sometimes our communities unfortunately shrunk, sometimes they were larger, but we always had a presence there. This is from a newspaper clipping called Hacherut from 1913. There's a little clipping, like an opinion section. It was printed January 2nd, 1913. There's a little clipping over there that I want to read to you. From the chief rabbi of Tveria. Now, Tveria is a city. My father grew up in Jerusalem. He grew up in what's known as the Batei Ungarin, so the Hungarian section of Mea Shearim. In fact, when my father grew up, there was no Kfish Echad, there was no Route 1. My grandmother said that's where that was the line, that was the border, and the Jordanian soldiers were on the other side. I would love them to have that source, please. They're going to have it? My grandmother, every single morning, you see, history gets rewritten very fast. What do I mean? It's not true that the religious Jews and the soldiers always fought with each other. It's not true. There was once a world where there weren't hafganot, where there weren't protests and yeshiva boys sitting on the floor and singing stupid songs about how this is Shmad and the Nazi. It's not true. This hype and this radicalization has happened very quickly. Right? It says, Vayakom melech hadash, right? If you look into Rashi, it says, Oh chadash mamash, maybe it's a new king. Oh shenitchachu gzerotav. You find very often that history gets replaced very quickly and the old story gets erased faster than you could even remember. My grandmother, every single morning, she said she would make in this little, the Turkish coffee. So she would put it on the kerosene lamps. That's how she would heat the water. And she would make coffee for the soldiers because the Jewish soldiers were all sectioned off right over there by Batei Ungarin, by the Hungarian section. And she would come out every single morning. Why would she give them coffee? Because if you look at pictures of my grandfather, he was also a soldier with a beard, with a kippah, and with Tzahal uniform. Now, if you'll ask any of the grandkids, nobody even knows this story. Must be it was a Purim costume. Except he's holding a real gun. And he has a real shirt that says Tzahal. Because one time, not so long ago, these things weren't so disparate. You were able to be both of them. Why am I telling you about Tveria? So after the War of Independence, unfortunately, the old city of Yerushalayim fell captive to the Jordanians for 19 years until we were able to recapture it in 1967, right, in the Six-Day War. During that time period, my grandmother got very scared. My grandfather used to come to the United States traveling. He was a traveling businessman. But my grandmother got scared because one of the artillery shells fell in their courtyard and she didn't want to stay in Jerusalem. So my father ended up moving to Tel Aviv Yafo. And then later on, he went to yeshiva in Tveria. And he said every single morning when he would wake up, he would go down to the Kinneret and he would swim for a mile out. I said, if you went 2 miles, you'd end up in Jordan already. So he would go out a little bit and he'd come back. And Tveria is one of the most, not just beautiful cities, but we have, all the cities in Israel are holy. Chachamim tell us Tveria is one of the 4 holy cities. For those of you familiar, and I recommend, Rabbi has this is a picture, if I could show you. Thank you. This is a picture of my grandfather. I want to show the screen first, if they could see. Could they see?
This screen is
Which one?
YouTube. This one.
Oh, this one. Zoom.
Yes.
That is a picture of my grandfather. I'm happy to show you. And Tveria, for those of you familiar, and like I said, I'm going to recommend, Rabbi has a fantastic shiur that he gave also in London on Dona Gracia and the purchase of the city of Tveria back in the day. But this is from one of the chief rabbis, Rabbi Chaim Abulafia. The Abulafia family had a dynasty of rabbis in Tveria. And this is what he writes. For those of you who are online, we have it now on Google Classroom.
It's on page 4 on the right side.
He says, Me'ai chamarmaru. He's borrowing words from Echa. He said, my insides are turning over. V'libi davai. עליי בראותי את הפירוד השורר בין האשכנזים והספרדים, עד שכמעט חושבים אותם כשני גזעים נפרדים. He said, my heart is broken to pieces. In 1913, when I see the split between the Ashkenazi and the Sephardic community. אין אני בא לדבר על המנהגים השונים. I'm not here to come talk about the different customs that we have. שהונחו כחץ מפריד ביניהם, that was thrown at us like an arrow that then shoots and splinters things apart. אלא רק על השאלה החשובה בדבר כשרות הבשר הנוגעת כך ליהדות. He said, I'm coming here to specifically address the issue with the meats. For those of you familiar, there was a big controversy with the meats and the status of kashrut. קשה לסבול את החרפה. He said, it's hard for me to just take in all the shame והעלבון שגורמים האשכנזים וספרדים. It's hard for me to swallow the humiliation and the shame that the Ashkenazim are causing to the Sephardic community. Why? Because when the Ashkenazim would slaughter the animal, lo lefi dineim, and it wasn't according to their set of laws. Miyad mafridim et habasar, immediately they would get rid of this piece of meat. Umochrim otam lo laashkenazim chas v'shalom. Of course, we're not going to give it to the Ashkenazim because they're Jews. Who are we going to give it to? The Goy Shel Shabbat, right? We're going to give it to Ella l'Svaradim. So the meat that they slaughtered, it's not good enough for the Ashkenazi Jew. Let's give it to the Sefaradim. Kilu Elahem min goyim chas v'shalom. Like chas v'shalom, the Sefaradim are some kind of non-Jews. V'od davar yoter nora, and something even more awesome in a bad way. Ro'eh ani po b'Yerushalayim. I see here in the holy city of Yerushalayim, ki השכנים הספרדים והאשכנזים אינם משאילים את כליהם איש לרעהו מחשש כשרות. That's what I have here. Do you have different words? He says, I see something absurd. You have a community of Jews that won't come to each other to borrow pots and pans from each other, simply based on ethnicity. גם האשכנזים לא שולחים מאכלים לבשלם בתנור אחד שבו מתבשלים מאכלי הספרדים. Also, the Ashkenazim are particular, and I have to understand, and this my grandmother did tell me, when she lived in Yerushalayim, they were so poor. We're talking about such poverty. Nobody had a refrigerator. Nobody had an oven. There was one central refrigerator. In 1948, they would rent space. She said they would take newspapers, and that's how they would wrap the fish and the leftovers, and you would rent a space in somebody's refrigerator. The Ashkenazim and the Sfaradim would not bake, particularly the Ashkenazim, would not bake in the ovens of the Sfaradim, because we're worried about their kashrut, because maybe our laws are different than theirs. Is this not a national disgrace? האין חילוקי דעות אלו גורמים להפריט את העם? להוסיף קרע על קרע? Is this not of colossal importance? Something that is dividing our nation on the most basic level, like we can't even sit at the same table and eat food together. We can't even borrow each other's pots and pans. We don't even trust each other's kashrut. Ashkenazim והספרדים היו רחוקים מזה. It's true, once upon a time, Ashkenazi Jews and Sephardic Jews lived very far from each other. Hence the name Ashkenaz, Germany, Sepharad, Spain. We lived far apart. ולכן לא הורגשו החילוקים ביניהם באופן בולט. And that's why Mommy, come sit. And that's why we didn't feel the difference so starkly. There wasn't such a stark difference because I'm going to go borrow the pot from somebody in Iraq when I'm living in Poland. No, obviously not. I'm not trekking across the world to get their pots and pans. But now that we're living together, אבל עכשיו, בתקופתנו זאת, but now in this era, שחיים האשכנזים והספרדים במרכז אחד, that we're living together in one central area, עיני כל היהודים בארצות גלותן נשואות לארץ ישראל. All the Jews in the galut, in the exile around, are looking at Israel as the model. ואין מי שיחשוב על הפירוד הגדול השורר ביניהם. Does it not make sense that this issue should be a priority of how do we take the Jewish people, it says Torah achat, Am echad, we are one nation with one Torah, who yes, for thousands of years have been separated, but now that we've come home, the rest of the Jewish communities around the world are looking at us, models. What are we going to do? And what do? We keep fighting. We keep distrusting. We keep distancing. We keep hating. צריך איפה לרפא את הנגע. We have to somehow heal this horrible stain. ולהביא הסכמה בין שני הצדדים. There has to be some kind of consensus between these two sides. למען לא יהיו עוד לשני גויים. So we חס ושלום shouldn't be two different nations. היהדות לא תפרח לעולם כל זמן שנושא דגלה מבלי הבדל עדה ומפלגה לא יכברו ויהיו אחדו יחד. We can't begin to talk about a nation. We're coming to Pesach, and we're trying to talk about nationhood. We cannot possibly talk about a nation, a state, a civilization, before we can heal the rift of two people who now have to fuse back into becoming one. לדעתי, according to me, Reb Chaim Abulafia says, נחוצה עבודת האחדות של האשכנזים והספרדים קודם לעבודת התרבות או הפצת הלשון וכדומה. In the early years, we were very busy of what kind of culture is Israel going to have? What language are we going to speak? Who are we going to look like? What music are we going to introduce? He says, I don't understand. That's a superfluous conversation. Because before we can discuss culture, and before we have the time to talk about the creative side of the nation, we have to talk about the most basic part of us, which is the divide that unfortunately hasn't been healed. And when the Jewish people will become united, Sephardim v'Ashkenazim yachad, both the Sephardic Jews and the Ashkenazi community, אז יהיה נקל מאוד להוציא לפועל את כל המטרות הקדושות שיש לעמנו. After that, once we become one joined nation, anything we want to accomplish is very easy after that. כמו הפצת לשוננו היקרה בפי בני ישראל, עבודת התרבות והתחייה הלאומית וכדומה. We could talk about nationality, we could talk about a common language, we could talk about a common culture and a food and whatever you want, we could talk about. But unless we heal the divide, we will be dealing with two parallel nations that at the very best have nothing to do with each other, and the very worst are continuously warring and are at each other's throat, trying to one-up each other to show who's better, who could do more, who's more religious, who has better ownership on the land and the culture and the people, and the infighting will never end. Ami, matai titached? My nation, when are you going to come and unite? כבר הגיעה השעה לאחדותנו. The hour, the time for us to come together has already come. נתעורר מכל קצות ארצות פזורינו, ונבנה לנו אומה שלמה ומאוחדת לחטיבה אחת ובלתי נפרדת. It's time to come home. It's time to build one stable, whole unit called עם ישראל. יקומו הגאונים והרבנים היותר מפורסמים, ויתוועדו לבד החכמים. Let's take all the religious leaders. Let's take them. You want to bring the Yemenite leaders, you want to bring the Moroccan leaders, you want to bring the Iraqi, the Polish, the Lithuanian, the Hungarian, the American, you name it. Bring all the Jewish leaders and let's create avad l'chachamim. למען יסירו את המכשולים העוצרים בעד אחדותנו הדתית והמסורתית, so that they can slowly, one at a time, remove the obstacles to us becoming one people. הלב פצוע יותר מדי. He said, my heart is so hurt and so inflicted with wounds. I can't. It's so wounded. Hagalut achlat nishmatenu. Unfortunately, exile has eaten our soul. Aval lo kivta et nitzotzeltenu. But it has not vanquished our spark. Nashlich chayim b'nitzotzot haele. Leman yu lalhevet gedola. He says, it's true. The exile has done its job. It has divided us not into one nation, not into two nations, into thousands. Today, Am Yisrael is thousands. Oh, I'm this Chassidut. No, I'm that Chassidut. On Pesach, give it a week. No, we only eat This hechsher food. When I got married, I told my husband, in my house, even my uncles and aunts on Pesach don't eat in our house. And he said, that's normal? I said, of course that's normal, because they're so religious. I said, even great rabbis, when they go visit each other, they won't even touch fruit that's on the table, because there's a concept that's called memish sich nicht. You ever heard memish sich nicht? Memish sich nicht literally means we don't mix with each other. We don't mix with each other. Now let me inform us. You know who we don't mix with? It's true. It's true. We don't mix with people who are outside of us. That's true. Bilam said it correctly. Hen am levadad yishkon, uvagoyim lo yitchashav. The Jewish people, we are a lonely people. We have to be alone. But whoever could have thought of such a ridiculous statement as the Jewish people within, we don't mix within each other? Oh, I can't date that person because they're not from your what? Because they're not from your exile? Are you kidding? Because their grandparents were thrown onto one corner of the world and you were thrown onto another corner of the world. That's why you can't marry each other. That's why your children can't go to the same schools. That's why you have cases like Emmanuel where you build walls in between schools, because my children and your children should never mix. Because my children are what? Because your children are what? What has gotten to Am Yisrael? I want to end off. Nashlich Chayim, he says, but don't worry. The Jewish people, we always have a spark. And that spark will never die. Yes, it's true. It's true that we have to be critical and look at the Jewish community and say, it comes Pesach, and we're busy talking about building a nation. Building a nation starts with yourself, with the people who are closest to you. I once heard somebody famously at a concert said, they were screaming, everybody in the 1960s, we want peace, we want love, He said, where do you want peace and love? Oh, they wanted it in Africa, they wanted it in India. He said, you know what? Start with the person near you, give them a hug. Oh no, that's too close, that's way too practical. I'm looking at us and saying, Am Yisrael is beautiful. The people are good, but we have problems. Chas v'shalom, not the problems and lies and the libels that they make up on the outside. But on the inside, we have to take the microscopes that everybody's now using to check if they have chametz in the corners of their house. Forget about those crumbs. If you came to Rabbi's class last night, you know those crumbs don't matter. I'm asking you, take the microscope, take that magnifying glass, and turn it onto your own heart. And say to yourself, am I the person who learned from Paro, where I pay lip service to the people on the periphery, where all I do is, of course I care about you. Oh, Nebuch, I'm so sorry. But when it comes to putting my dollar, where it comes to putting my effort, I'm nowhere to be found. Or am I going to be from the people who say, no, Am Yisrael, it's time for us to come back home together. And the only way that Am Yisrael will survive October 7th and move forward into the future is if we're going to start realizing we're one nation. We started off as 70 people who went down to Egypt, but 210 years later, we came out as one people, as one Am Yisrael. And I'm asking all of us, if we can start the work, I promise you that by the time Pesach is over, we will be marching not out of Egypt, but every single galut that we're in, we're going to come home. We're coming home. We're going to build. We're going to rebuild. We're going to dance again. And we are, Bezrat Hashem, going to expand the borders of Eretz Yisrael, of the land of Israel, because the Jewish people are going to be fruitful and multiply and recognize that as a nation, together, we can, Bezrat Hashem, change the entire world for better. Until then, I want to wish everybody a Chag Kasher V'Sameach. We are looking forward to seeing all of you. For those of you who are on the screen, a Chag Sameach wherever you are. I want to let you know it's not too late. So if you would like, Chag Sameach is going to happen here in San Diego. So anybody that would like to come, please let us know. And we will make sure that Kol Dichvin, we really have a place for you, and we really mean it. Bezrat Hashem.